When Viking ships crossed the North Sea, loaded with timber, iron, livestock and plunder, failure was not an inconvenience. A slipped rope could mean a lost mast, a shattered hull, or men swept overboard. Rope was not an accessory in the Viking world. It was infrastructure. Every knot, splice and wrap was tested under motion, shock load, salt and cold. What makes Viking ropecraft remarkable is not its age, but how closely its priorities align with the problems modern truckers still face today. Shifting loads, vibration, weather exposure, and the need to secure cargo quickly without specialized hardware. The techniques developed by Norse sailors and haulers were not decorative traditions. They were solutions built for moving heavy loads safely across hostile terrain. Why Viking rope knowledge was shaped by movement rather than static loads. Viking rope systems evolved on ships that never stopped moving. Loads surged with waves, wind shifted suddenly, and anchors dragged. This forced Norse rope workers to prioritize tension control over brute strength. A rope that held perfectly still could still fail once movement began. The same problem exists on highways today, where vibration and braking cause cargo to creep, loosen and retension repeatedly. Vikings addressed this by developing techniques that locked under load but could be adjusted without cutting or untying the entire system. How Viking rope was constructed to survive abuse. Viking ropes were typically made from hemp, bast fibres or hair, laid in multiple strands, twisted opposite their final direction. This created ropes that tightened under load rather than unravelling. The rope itself was treated as a dynamic component, not a passive one. Modern synthetic ropes often exceed Viking rope in raw tensile strength, but they behave differently under shock. Viking techniques assumed stretch, compression and wear would happen, and designed around it. Why the Viking half-hitch series still outperforms single-knot tie-downs. One of the most common Viking load-securing methods was a running series of half-hitches along a line under tension. Instead of relying on a single terminal knot, the rope was wrapped repeatedly around anchor points, each hitch sharing the load. If one hitch loosened, the others held. Modern truckers often rely on ratchet straps or single tie-down points, which concentrate stress. Using a Viking-style hitch series along a rail or stake distributes force across the entire length of the rope and reduces sudden failure. So, how did Vikings control tension without any mechanical devices? Well, before winches and ratchets ever came into play, Vikings relied on friction. A technique we know today as a trucker's hitch actually has its roots in Norse hauling methods. The rope was looped back on itself to create a sort of mechanical advantage, and then it was locked in place with friction wraps rather than hard knots. This clever approach allowed tension to be increased gradually and, just as importantly, released under control. For modern truckers, this method is still valuable, especially when you're securing irregular loads where ratchets can't sit flat, or when there's a risk of over-tightening and damaging your cargo. Let's talk about why Viking rope wraps prevent slippage better than knots alone. Viking ropecraft depended heavily on wraps around posts, beams or cargo instead of just tying knots in mid-air. Wrapping a rope increases the surface contact, which in turn increases friction. With this, a wrapped rope can hold massive loads without needing complicated knots. This is a principle that applies directly to flatbed hauling today. If you wrap a rope around a stake pocket or rail several times before tying it off, you dramatically increase its holding power and reduce the stress on any knot you use. Now, how did Vikings plan for rope wear and failure? Well, they always assumed ropes would wear out eventually. Their systems were designed so that sections could be replaced without needing to dismantle the whole rig. Whenever permanence was required, splices were preferred over knots. A splice preserves more of the rope's strength and is much less likely to loosen from vibration. Modern truckers who splice eyes into the ends of ropes for hooks or rails get the same benefit. The load stays secure, even after thousands of miles on the road. So, let's talk about how these techniques translate directly to modern hauling. When you're out there securing lumber, steel, or even heavy machinery, those Viking principles still absolutely apply. You want to use multiple points of contact, not just a single tie down. Rely on wraps to boost friction before you tie things off. And always choose knots that tighten under load rather than ones that might capsize. It's important, too, to allow for a bit of movement by checking and retentioning, instead of just locking everything down rigidly. These steps, well, they mirror Norse practice and address the very same physical forces acting on cargo today. Now, why hasn't modern equipment replaced good ropecraft? Well, ratchet straps can fail. Chains, they loosen. Hardware sometimes bends, and when that happens, honestly, understanding rope can be the difference between recovery and disaster. The Vikings, they carried spare rope and their knowledge, not just spare parts. That mindset, it still matters wherever mechanical systems might fail or freeze. Why did this knowledge persist for so many centuries? Viking rope techniques, they spread all through medieval Europe, influencing maritime and hauling practices for hundreds of years. Their endurance is proof of their effectiveness. These methods weren't just preserved for the sake of tradition. No, they survived because they worked, especially under pressure. So, why should serious professionals revisit these methods? Well, for history enthusiasts, Viking ropecraft reveals a kind of practical intelligence that's often overshadowed by ships and swords. For modern truckers and haulers, it offers time-tested solutions that actually complement modern gear rather than competing with it. Rope doesn't care about the era. Really, it only responds to physics. If you value historical knowledge that still earns its place in modern work, then this is exactly the kind of insight Relic Logic exists to share. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more deep examinations of ancient techniques that still outperform modern shortcuts, and share this episode with anyone who understands that real skill, well, it never goes out of date.